Okay, well, let's get started. So my name's Mike Hatfield. I'm the lead engineer for the mobile apps at Alfresco. Currently, we have 3 teams. We have native iOS development, native Android development, and hybrid development. And I work with Mark Dubresson, our product manager, to bring those projects to you. And hopefully allow you to use the apps as users and the SDKs as developers and partners. So I said that the title has changed slightly from that published, but I wanted to cover a little bit more than just hybrid development. I wanted to talk a bit more about our SDKs, and then we'll cover some discussion about native versus hybrid development. There's an awful lot of blog mileage has been written about those arguments. I'm not going to argue one way or the other, just try and present some facts. And then I'm going to specifically look at one hybrid solution called Appcelerator, and discuss what other options are out there for mobile development. And then finally, you've probably seen this piece of equipment on here, a quick demo of what we can do with fairly quickly with apps built on the SDK. So today, Alfresco has 2 native SDKs, Android and iOS. The main goal is to abstract all the complexity of talking to Alfresco repositories from you, to provide a clean API, and you don't have to worry about whether you're talking to a 3.4 server, a 4.0 server, a 4.2 server, or a cloud server, all of which have particular quirks in the way the APIs work, as I'm sure some of you are aware, and also to hide certain feature disparities, whether you're using a JBPM workflow engine or an activity workflow engine. The latest versions of the SDKs work against both of them and provide a common API on top to make it easy for you to write mobile apps against those without sweating the details. That's the job of my team, and that's what they're very good at. So why would you want to use the SDKs rather than going directly to the APIs and the network? Well, as I said, it gives you insulation against repository versions, and they're also, we build our apps on top of them. Now this is not 100% true for the iOS case, but we are migrating our iOS app onto the SDK, and so you know that anything that we release onto the Android or the iOS App Store, you'll be able to replicate by building on top of the SDK. And we're very pleased that the management have decided to use simple and smart, because that's exactly what we've been doing in the mobile teams for over a year now. We've used simple interfaces, smart underneath, to abstract all the complexity away from you. So we like this a lot. The code is all available on GitHub. The existing iOS app, due to historical reasons of working with one of our partners, Zia, is actually available on Bitbucket. What we're actually going to do is move that code base, once we refactor it on top of the iOS SDK, move it back into GitHub. So we'll have, this will increase, so we've already got the Android app, the Android SDK, we've got the iOS SDK. Later this year, you'll see, or early next year, you'll see the iOS app on there, 1.6. And then we'll also release the Appcelerator hybrid code, and I'll talk a little bit about those later on, but you'll see those on the Alfresco GitHub repo as well. So we encourage you to fork them, send pull requests, send bug requests, and we'll do our best to serve those for you. So the original title of the presentation was Building Mobile Apps Quickly with the Alfresco SDKs. So I'm going to prove that that can be done by writing an app live, hoping the demo gods are kind to me today. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to write 2 apps through the course of this presentation. One using Xcode and native iOS development, And then we're going to do the same app using Appcelerator, just to show you the differences and to show that neither platform is particularly scary for simple use cases. So let's dive right in. I'm hoping the projector will allow this to be readable. All I'm going to do is create a new Xcode project. Let me see if I can hide some of the PowerPoint stuff away. We're going to call it Hello Summit. There's one I prepared earlier. I seem to have lost my mouse, which is always a problem, these things. Let me just move that away. Now, I don't know how readable that is, probably not at all. So let's see if we can do something about that. Let's not do that. Displays. Bring the resolution down. Hopefully be a little more readable. I'll zoom in on the source code once we're there. All I'm doing is creating a boilerplate Xcode app. I don't intend to cover Xcode Objective-C. I'm just going to show you how quick and simple it is to build an app based on the SDKs. So the first thing I need to do is bring in the SDKs, the iOS SDK, which I have here, and then just make it available across the application. And we've made this much simpler in the recent SDK, just a single import, Alfresco SDK. That makes the entire SDK available across our application. See if we can, that's not zooming in, okay. Which saves me from having to import code throughout all the classes. Let's create a UI. This has become much easier in Xcode 5. This is the latest Apple release. I'm just going to replace the default one that we've been given with that and drop in a table view. I'm then going to have a very basic table cell. And this is all, for those of you who remember Visual Basic, it's similar, but we just don't call it Visual Basic, because that doesn't look good on the CV. I then need to put that into a navigation controller. Remove that. So that's all the layout I'm going to do. So here's some boilerplate code that Xcode has created for me. Let's see if I can zoom that in a little bit. So all we're going to do is just, I have a repository running locally, and all I want to do is just going to list the root folder and just show you how easy that's going to be. So just to make sure we don't go down the garden path, I'm going to bring up my cheat sheet notes. Okay, so I just need somewhere to store the nodes that are going to come back. And then it's going to get an Alfresco repository session. So I'm just going to create a repository session. Connect with URL, and I'm going to cheat, just hard code everything where possible. So localhost, highly secure username and password. And what this will do is this will go and into the SDK, and there's quite a lot happening underneath. This is where different simple and smart comes in. That single connect will go in and work out which version of the Alfresco repository I'm running at that address, and whether I can use the seamless atom binding or the old web service seamless binding. It will also work out whether we've got the JBPM or activity engine available, and make sure that everything that you call into the SDK is going to go to the right place within the repository. So once I've got a session, I need an Alfresco document folder service. All our SDK classes are prefixed with Alfresco just to make sure that they don't collide with anything else. So I'm going to try and work with this small screen. Okay. So I might need to refer to my notes. Right, why is this? I do love when autocomplete just fails in Xcode. It does choose its moments. No, it's not going to play ball. Okay, I'm going to cheat on that line. And then I can that will go and get the query the repository, get the root folder. So I can then call into there service any thanks Xcode. What are we upset about? When I say quickly, it's all relative, by the way, in the, that's why I removed it from the slides. What have I done wrong here? I've obviously done something silly. There we go. So there we go. Xcode's much happier now. So we're going to retrieve children in the folder, and we just need session root folder. And what that will do is give me, if I use the correct, that'll give me an array. So I just need to store that array away, and then the table view that we created or not. Reload data. I knew this was a bad idea. Simply create an app, they said. Right. As in all good demos, there's a backup. So, because this is probably riddled with typos, let's fix that. Okay. I realised what I've done wrong. Demo nerves. I haven't hooked up the code to the UI. So let's just do that. So those few lines of slightly stressful code have initialized the SDK, gone and got the root folder, and given me a list of all the things, all the folders, all the nodes in that root folder. So now I just need to display them. And this really is boilerplate code, so I'm not going to bore you more than you probably are by writing that out. So it's just some boilerplate Xcode code just to populate the table cell. Hands up who thinks this is going to work. You're all too kind. We did it. So this is just a very simple way of getting a list of nodes. There's an awful lot happened underneath in the SDK to get this. But I could, in theory, point this at a 3.4 to a 4.2 server with an OAuth sequence. I could connect it to cloud. It would be exactly the same code on top. And that's, you know, half a dozen lines of code. That's what we want. Our goal is to make your lives simpler by just making the SDKs as simple as possible. Let's get back to some more stable ground, PowerPoint. Let's talk about native versus hybrid. What's the difference? Well, the main difference, native, you need to learn the language that's native to that device or system. So in the case of iOS, you look at Objective-C, Android is Java, Windows Mobile, C#. You often have proprietary IDEs, so Xcode, Android uses Eclipse, Windows Mobile uses Visual Studio, and often you need to use a vendor-specific operating system. So you cannot write iOS apps unless you're using a Mac, and this is often a stumbling block for some people. Now, hybrid, on the other hand, you're essentially building HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and there's lots of tools out there to do that. You can use any IDE, and you can use any operating system to do that. So does that mean hybrid is always better? Well, yes and no. You've got to be very careful about performance with hybrid. Apple especially don't give you all the performance code if you embed a web browser in an app. They claim this is for security reasons. I suspect it's more revenue reasons. But there's things you have to be aware of to do with responsiveness and performance when running a web app instead of a native app, mostly because it's interpreted JavaScript and HTML rather than low-level optimized native code. There's also, you suddenly get browser quirks. So the mantra of write once, run anywhere for hybrid doesn't really hold true because you've still got different web rendering engines on each platform. And native code may still be required. If you're talking to, say, an Alfresco repository or a device like this, the web browser doesn't know how to do that natively. So remember, you have to remember that a hybrid app is mostly a web app with a thin native wrapper around it. Often that native wrapper won't give you the access that you need to low-level device equipment, so you may still need to write native code. And you've still got UI design to do. There's no getting away from that. And rather than using like a drag-and-drop tool like I was doing, you have to break out HTML and CSS tools in a lot of cases. So let's assume you want to look at hybrid. What are your options today? Well, there's plenty out there. I'm sure most of you will have heard of PhoneGap and Apache Cordova. They're essentially the same thing. Apache Cordova is the open source, well, they're both open source, but PhoneGap is owned by Adobe and is essentially a rebranded version of Cordova. Sencha is another rebranding of Cordova, and they have the Sencha Touch APIs that sit on top of that. And then Appcelerator have sort of gone their own way a little bit. Again, it's open source, but they wrap the native user interfaces in JavaScript, so there's much less user interface work to be done. And then there's lots of others out there. A lot of these are very specifically for games. Unity is a very popular platform for writing games. and you can use C++, Objective-C, Lua script, all sorts of things. So how do you choose? Well, do you go native and take the hit? Maybe you're only supporting one platform, so that's not an issue. Do you do web because you've got the skills in-house, or do you do hybrid? Well, guess what? It depends. It depends on what your users and your customers want to use, what devices they want to use, what they want to use those apps for. Are they using an awful lot of low-level native features, or is it a relatively simple folder browsing scenario? There's no simple answer, is the short version. I want to talk a little bit more about Appcelerator and the work we've been doing to enable this to be used with the Alfresco SDKs. So in their own words, it's an open, extensible development environment for creating native apps across lots of platforms. I've left BlackBerry in here. It's probably less relevant these days. Windows Mobile is probably a better fit in there. But you have a choice of writing pure JavaScript against the Appcelerator APIs, and they will wrap the native UI controls, or you can do your UI in HTML5, so it's whatever you're most comfortable with. Now, one surprising thing I learned, again, in their own words, Titanium is not an attempt at write once, run anywhere. They acknowledge that there are platform quirks, browser quirks. There's different features available on different platforms. So Android, it's much easier to share data between apps, whereas iOS is all very, very sandboxed. So what Titanium is, which is the Appcelerator's framework, it's an attempt to achieve code reuse. So you can reuse a huge chunk of code, but you still have platform-specific considerations that you need to take into account. So this is what Titanium Studio looks like. It's essentially Eclipse, and you write JavaScript and/or HTML, which then talks down to the Titanium SDK. That's on a completely open source. It's on GitHub, and they have various stacks that then interface the JavaScript with the native SDKs. So they're fully App Store compliant, which is important if you want to be on the Apple platform. They're essentially wrapping the Objective-C or the Java or the C# libraries and just exposing those as JavaScript. They also allow third-party modules to be brought in, where you can talk to third-party SDKs, and guess what? That's where we are. So we've undertaken some work to bridge code between JavaScript layer and our two native SDKs, iOS and Android. So we're wrapping the features and making all that complexity with the simple APIs, just another bridge, make that available in JavaScript. The project is ongoing. It will be documented, tested, and supported. The documents will look a little bit like this. So we have these already. These are on GitHub. We haven't formalized a release yet. We're still going through QA. But this will happen this year, in the iOS side at least. And this is how we're looking for the roadmap. So currently, we're writing a bridge on the iOS 1.1 and Android 1.1 SDKs just because they're a known stable platform. And we're doing read-only, browse, use cases only for now. The next step will be to do the write cases, so we'll be able to create documents, create folders, upload, that sort of thing. And then the work will carry on to bring in the new features that were introduced in the 1.3 SDKs, like workflow, and people profiles and things like that. And then at some point we may look at PhoneGap and Cordova. But for now we're concentrating on Appcelerator. So we're about here for now. We have the first release of the iOS side of things nearly ready. The Android side, we've been working with the Appcelerator guys because they had some problems that we've helped them fix. and they've been very grateful, and they've been actually very open in working with us on sorting out those problems. But that's why we'd like to get both platforms at the same level, rather than take one to completion and then try to tackle the other one. So, I'm going to try and build another app. This time I'm going to do exactly the same app, so it's just going to browse the root folders, and we're going to do it in Titanium. I say we, I'm hoping for support. So I'm firing up Titanium Studio, and as I said, it's essentially Eclipse with the Titanium modules built in. Just let it go through its startup. So it's probably not particularly visible. We have a few test projects in here. We have a test harness that we use internally that will exercise all of the bridge code. And we have one called Alfresco UI, which is it's kind of a hello world that lets you browse into folders, and it will show you, it's a fairly good getting starting guides. So what I'm going to do is just create a new application. Hopefully. Eclipse. I don't like Eclipse. Here we go. Okay. New mobile project. And again, we're going to call this Hello Summit. And I apologize if this isn't very readable. I'll zoom in once I get to the code so you can see what's going on. But I'll just do the very basic stuff. Okay, no, that's not created the right type of project. Mobile project. Try that again. There's two ways of building Appcelerator apps. This is very obviously a deliberate segue into this. There's Alloy, which is, like I said, it allows you to build XML or UIs by doing it through XML, so you can describe the UI. Or there's Classic, which is where you do it all through code, and you've got the option of building an HTML-based application there. So because it's a little bit simpler, I'm just going to do a single window application, and that's exactly the same type of project I created in Xcode. So let's just fill in the necessary bits. It's going to make me put in the URL. So it's just going to go through a fairly basic templating system, and we've got our Hello Summit app. I'm going to add the Alfresco module. The modules ship as zip files, and you just copy them into a location that Titanium Studio knows about. So I've already done that. You can see I've got my iOS one here. I haven't got the Android one installed on here, but you would see the Android one next to this. Once we release it, you can see Titanium has picked this up and noted that I've got this available for the iOS platform. So let's close that up. There's a lot of boilerplate code here that Titanium has created for me. A lot of it I'm just going to get rid of because it's just not necessary for our purposes. Zoom in on this So those of you who've written JavaScript or have looked at share code will see this pattern a lot. It's just a JavaScript enclosure, if you like. Now, the other thing that we haven't done yet is generate the JSON needed for Appcelerator to do autocomplete. So I really am going to cheat on this one because there's just too much typing and we haven't got the autocomplete yet. We will have autocomplete. It will be generated by our build system. But for now, I'm just going to cut and paste, just because otherwise you'll be here all day. So this is you can tell it is just JavaScript. You can see the JavaScript names. The Titanium SDK is the TI, and within there are various top-level projects. So there's UI as common UI across all platforms, but then there's also modules for Android that deals with sharing intents and all Android-specific features. And this is all very well documented. So this is an app I use called Dash that pulls together lots of different documentation sets, and you can see our own Appcelerator documentation in here, and it's very well documented. The Titanium set, they're quite good at giving example code and documenting their SDKs. So let's go back to our app. So all I'm doing here is exactly the same as I was doing in Xcode. I've got a window and a table view. And I've brought in the Alfresco SDK, and that essentially eventually will give me access to all of the Alfresco SDK top-level API that I had in my native environments. So for now it's read-only, but we will be doing read-write in the future. So exactly the same calls. I'm going to create a repository session with exactly the same details, so just my local server and my highly secure username and password. And the way Titanium works, because it's JavaScript, it's an event-driven system. So because JavaScript is it's not especially thread-friendly, there is technology called web workers that some platforms support where you can spin up different threads. Titanium assumes that everything is single-threaded. So asynchronous operations happen by firing events back. So as part of our bridge code, we manage all that. So we'll send a request off to the Alfresco repository, and then we'll return immediately to JavaScript so that the user interface isn't blocked. And then later, once we get the response, we'll fire an event and you can pick up events. So it's all very, very event-based. So you can see I'm adding a listener for success here, which means that I've connected to the repository. We obviously have error handlers that you can pick up on and display the UI. Obviously, we're not going to get an error here, so I'm not going to worry about them. And we've got similar calls. So we've got the document folder service. And what I'm going to do is retrieve the same call. I'm going to retrieve the root folder. I'll get an event back. And I'm sorry I'm jumping around a little bit. It's just the structure of this project. So I'll get a retrieve folder. And once I've done that, I can retrieve the children in that folder. And then for each folder node that I get back, I'll get an event. And all I'm going to do is create a table view row with the name of that event. We send events for document and folder nodes because we'll treat them differently, and they're treated differently in the SDK. For completeness, I would put a document node event listener on here as well, but I'm not going to do that. So that should be it. I'm not going to take a vote this time for whether you think it'll work or not, because no one stuck their hand up last time. But what's happening now is that Appcelerator is generating an Xcode project because we're targeting the iOS platform. Behind the scenes, it's generated, it's pulled in all the Titanium SDK, and it's invoked Xcode, and it copies all my JavaScript code into there, which it's then going to run as a native application. So for all intents and purposes, this is a native app. And it's running that JavaScript. It looks exactly the same as the app that we wrote in Xcode, but we use JavaScript. Now obviously this is a very simple example, but I've got all the building blocks here to then navigate down into those folders, look at documents, and I haven't had to touch a single line of Objective-C. And I could target this if I dropped in the Android module once that was released. I could launch this on an Android device, and we would get an Android native table view, and I haven't had to change a single line of code. Now, obviously, that slightly goes against what I said about it's not write once, run anywhere, but obviously for a simple browse app like this, it is. And these are native table cells, and this is what the Titanium SDK provides. So just go back to the roadmap for our hybrid development. We're expecting to release the iOS version very soon. Android will follow shortly after. Like I said, we're just working with Appcelerator on sorting out a couple of issues. And then we'll take feedback from this on you guys. If you want us to go and look at PhoneGap and Cordova instead because that's what you prefer to build with, then we'll take that on board. This roadmap is flexible. We've heard that people prefer to do JavaScript rather than HTML simply because of all the gotchas with HTML across different platforms. The main problem being which UI do you use, what UI paradigms. So you might generate an HTML app that looks great on iOS and does all the iOS 7 icons. It's going to look not very good on Android, and people won't know how to use your app. So this is why we've chosen Appcelerator. I'm going to change track now a little bit and talk about this device, Fujitsu Scanner. What I've done is taken one of our applications that was actually built on the SDK. This is our MDM application. And we're working with Fujitsu to incorporate their SDK into their scanner. And what this will give me is a completely secure paper to mobile to Alfresco repository scanning solution using mobile device management. I'm not going to go into mobile device management now. I've got a talk later this afternoon, 10 to 4, where I'll describe that in more detail. And John Marie earlier talked about how we're doing MDM. So I encourage you to go and look at that. So, demo number 3. What I'm going to do is just connect my iPad here. So this is just the iPad I've got down here, and this is our Alfresco for Good application. It looks very similar to the app that's in the normal app that's in the App Store, and that was a deliberate decision. You can see I've got sites here. I can browse the repository activities, but it's all built on top of the Good Technologies SDK, so it's all very secure. Every piece of data that comes in is stored in an AES-256 encrypted store. There's nothing in a temporary file or anything else. So what I'm going to do is just acquire a scan. So I've just very simply, because this app was built on the SDK, it was very simple for me to add the Fujitsu SDK. Let's see, no hands. Just scanning in those documents. That's then going to pass them back to my app. It's not storing them in the ScanSnap application, and we're not storing them other than in memory before we upload them to the repository. So I'm just going to hit upload. And those are available in this app. Now the difference between this app and the normal App Store app is that I cannot send these documents to QuickOffice. I'm prevented from doing so. So this is a secure scanning solution. I can send these documents to other Good secured applications because Good has guaranteed that they also store their data in an AES 256 encrypted store. So by integrating an SDK-based app with an SDK for something like that, we can create a full secure scanning solution. And I know Peter's sat at the back, and but I do say I love this device. I've borrowed the one that he lent us, the Office. It's sat at home, and I use it for scanning everything. And there's going to be a smaller one of these appearing soon, early next year. Fully battery powered, so you can have a battery powered, Wi-Fi enabled scanner that you can drive from your mobile app and work with us, and you can have a completely secure scanning system. So that's me done. Thank you for your patience with the coding and the demos. It's always slightly scary doing that. Never a good idea, but there you go. I do have a couple of minutes for any questions, if anyone has any. They don't have to be related to what I talked about here, anything about our mobile SDKs or roadmap or apps, if you have any queries. Sorry,
Hi.
Hi.
It's Alessandro. You already mentioned that when it comes to choosing among hybrid versus native, it's rather a matter of performances. And I'm talking because I have a real life example where we just crashed with Titanium because of this problem, because we had to display hundreds of items. So what's your opinion about that? Is there a rule of thumb that we can use to choose among one method or the other?
It's going to come back to it depends. I mean, was your app JavaScript or was it HTML? It was JavaScript. Okay, so it's slightly surprising that it couldn't cope with that. I haven't had that much experience with Appcelerator myself. Certainly haven't done too much scaling testing on it. My preference is to always go native, but then we have the resources in-house to do that. We have some really good iOS developers and we have a good Android developer it's at the back there. So we realized that not everyone can do that, which is why we're doing the hybrid solutions. There isn't a simple answer, to be honest, and I'm quite happy to come and talk to you later to find out where you hit those brick walls and where you had scaling problems, because that would be very interesting to feed back to our product management team and learn about what the issues were. It doesn't really answer your question, but it's very interesting, and I'll come and find you later. Thank you. Was there one question here?
Thanks. I would like to ask how similar are the SDKs to iOS and Android? I mean, from the development point of view, not feature by feature. But
as similar as possible. We work from a single design spec when we're going from version to version. And in fact, it's a bit subtle, but the Android has had so 1.0, 1.02, 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 releases. iOS has had 1.0, 1.1, and then 1.3. We're actually skipping 1.2 in order to bring a bit more parity to the SDKs, so that you know that if you're working with iOS 1.3 or Android 1.3, you'll have the same features in the SDK and as similar an API on top as possible. So they both use similar services, document folder services, workflow services, people services, the same concepts, and it's as much as possible the same APIs, the same methods within those services. it's one of our design goals is that people shouldn't have to completely rethink how they use each SDK, but naturally there's going to be a few differences in how the platforms work, and there's just some things that we can't deal with. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope this has been useful. Come and find me at the mobile booth if you have any other questions or need to see some of the code. Thank you.